Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Ever feel like you're just stuck, like spinning your wheels, putting in the work, but not getting anywhere?
Oh, yeah, that feeling of running on a treadmill but going nowhere.
Exactly. Today we're diving into momentum, 13 ways to unlock your potential. The self-help book by Lee Chambers. It really pushes us to rethink how we view success.
And maybe unlock our true potential along the way.
Absolutely. We'll have the Amazon link in the episode description if you want to check it out. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives like this.
Always appreciate that.
So before we really get into it, let's talk about Lee Chambers himself. His career journey is fascinating, definitely not a straight line.
Yeah, he's been all over the place. Finance, tech, then sports, and now he's an entrepreneur.
A very nonlinear path, and that really shapes his view on finding momentum.
What's also super interesting is that he wasn't diagnosed with autism until he was an adult.
Right, and he talks about how that diagnosis has given him a unique perspective on how we can leverage our strengths to overcome challenges.
He also had a pretty serious health crisis, which forced him to reevaluate what really mattered.
All these experiences, the career changes, the diagnosis, the health challenges, they've all impacted how he views living a fulfilling life.
And that really comes through in his writing. He doesn't just give surface-level advice, he goes deep into the psychology behind our habits and what motivates us.
Okay, let's unpack some of the core ideas. One that really grabbed my attention was flexible vision. He argues that holding on to a rigid vision of success can actually backfire.
Yeah, that whole follow the script thing can be limiting.
We can get so focused on one specific outcome that we miss opportunities that might be a better fit in the long run.
Like, we become blind to detours that could lead to something amazing.
We've all felt that pressure, haven't we? Go to the right school, get the right job, climb the ladder. But what if that ladder's leaning against the wrong wall?
What if our talents and passions are pointing us in a totally different direction?
Exactly. And that's where this flexible vision comes in. It's about being open to new possibilities and adapting, understanding that what we consider success might change over time.
It's like being willing to change course if you spot a better route.
He has this great example in the book, someone who was set on a career in finance, had it all planned out.
Oh, I think I remember this one.
Then this opportunity to use their skills at a nonprofit came up, and they ended up finding it way more fulfilling.
It wasn't part of the original plan, but it really aligned with their values.
So how do we develop this flexible vision? Chambers gives some really insightful questions. He asks, what have you done in the past that gave you the most fulfillment? What are your non-negotiables? What truly excites you?
Those are great questions. They force you to look inwards and figure out what really drives you.
It's not about blindly following what everyone else expects. It's about defining success on your own terms.
Absolutely. It's about listening to your own internal compass and letting that guide your decisions, even if it means going off the beaten path.
And sometimes that detour can lead to a much more satisfying journey.
Like taking the scenic route instead of the highway. Sure, there might be a few bumps, but the view is way better.
Now, on the topic of dealing with challenges, Chambers digs into the idea of control versus influence. He says that while we all want control, sometimes focusing on what we can influence is actually more helpful.
It's so true. We often waste energy trying to control things that are completely out of our hands.
Like trying to stop the tide from coming in.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot of frustration, even feeling helpless, like no matter what you do, nothing changes. Chambers says that when we shift our focus to what we can actually influence, our actions, our mindset, our responses, we gain a sense of agency.
He uses the story of Charlotte Watson. She was a teacher who was dealing with burnout and bullying at work.
Tough situation.
She felt completely trapped. But instead of trying to change the whole school system, she decided to change her own situation.
She took control.
She left her job and started her own tutoring company. She created a work environment that aligned with her values. She couldn't control the actions of others, but she could control her own choices.
And create a more positive path for herself. Powerful story.
It shows that even when things are tough, we always have a choice. We can choose to stay stuck, or we can focus on what we can influence and build something different for ourselves.
That really hits home. It makes you wonder, are there places in our own lives where we're clinging to things that aren't working anymore?
Are we trying to force control where influence might be a better approach?
Big questions, for sure.
Definitely worth thinking about. Sometimes, letting go of that need to control everything can actually open up new possibilities and lead to more freedom.
And maybe even more fulfillment, too. And, this idea of control versus influence, it actually connects to something else Chambers talks about, the sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, the sunk cost fallacy? That's a tough one. I think we've all been there. How does that fit into this idea of momentum?
Well, it's like this. We tend to stick with things, even when they're not working, just because we've already invested so much. Time, effort, maybe even money.
It's like that saying, throwing good money after bad.
Exactly. And it can happen in any part of life. Relationships, projects, careers. Staying in a job that's going nowhere just because you've been there forever.
Or pouring energy into a project that's clearly dead in the water.
Right. Chambers really encourages us to be honest with ourselves. Ask the tough questions. Is this still serving me? Am I holding on because I'm afraid to let go? Or is it time to move on?
Sometimes walking away is the best thing you can do, even if it's hard.
It frees up your energy to focus on something that actually aligns with your goals and values. Speaking of things we try to avoid, let's talk about failure. We're often taught to see it as a bad thing, something to be ashamed of.
But Chambers flips that idea on its head. He sees failure as a key part of growth.
He actually argues that it's not the opposite of success, but a stepping stone to success. We learn and grow from those mistakes and setbacks.
He uses the example of Steve Jobs and the Apple Newton, that personal digital assistant, remember. He was supposed to be revolutionary, but completely flopped.
Flop.
But, as Chambers points out, even Steve Jobs, someone we consider a visionary, learned a lot from that failure. And those lessons helped him create the iPhone. What we might see as a setback could actually be setting us up for success down the line.
It changes your perspective.
Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? After a setback, Chambers says to ask, why did this happen? And what can I learn from it?
It's about shifting from blame to curiosity, looking for the lesson.
He also talks about the importance of having a 360-degree network. People you trust to give you support, honest feedback, different points of view. They can help you see failure as an opportunity to learn, not a personal attack.
Having those people in your corner who encourage you, challenge you, help you see the bigger picture, it's invaluable.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about risk. It's a word that can make people anxious, but Chambers says that learning to manage risk is a big part of unlocking your potential.
Yeah, he uses a poker analogy. A new player takes a lot of unnecessary risks because they don't understand the odds. They overestimate their ability. A pro, though, calculates those risks, makes informed decisions, knows when to fold. It's about strategy, not just jumping in blindly.
So it's not about being fearless, but being...
That leads to something called survivorship bias. It's this tendency to focus only on the success stories and ignore all the failures that probably happened along the way.
like only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Right. He uses the example of Abraham Wald, who was analyzing damaged bombers during World War II. Military leaders wanted to reinforce the parts of the planes that showed the most damage, thinking those were the weak spots.
Makes sense on the surface.
But Wald realized they were only looking at the planes that had survived. To really improve safety, they needed to figure out why the planes that didn't come back were going down. The failures held the most important lessons.
That's a really interesting point. So how do we apply that to risk-taking in our own lives?
It means realizing that we can't only look at the success stories. Risk is part of any journey, and it's about managing that risk, not trying to avoid it completely.
He tells the story of Jenny Smith. She took a big risk, leaving a stable job to start her own business. But she didn't just leap without thinking. She really thought it through, planned for challenges, built a support network.
Calculated risk.
Exactly. And her story shows that we can achieve our goals if we're willing to step outside our comfort zone and take those calculated risks. But Chambers also emphasizes that it's not all about individual success. Collaboration is key.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in that go-it-alone mentality, especially in today's world. But working together can be incredibly powerful.
He even shared that African proverb.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Love that. It really speaks to the power of community. And he encourages us to change how we think about networking. It's not about what can you do for me.
It's about building real relationships that benefit everyone involved. Relationships based on shared values and goals.
And he also talks about stakeholders and sponsors, especially for people working within organizations. Stakeholders are invested in your success, while sponsors actively champion you. Nurturing those relationships can be so important for your career. Something I think a lot of people struggle with is overthinking. getting stuck in your head, analyzing everything, worrying about every possibility, it can be paralyzing.
Overthinking can really kill your momentum.
For sure. Chambers acknowledges that it's a common obstacle and gives some good strategies for dealing with it. He points out that it can come from external factors, like caring too much about what others think, or internal ones, like our own
Just
insecurities.
like a mental hamster wheel, just going round and round.
And often it comes from this need for external validation. We focus so much on meeting others' expectations that we lose sight of our own inner
So
voice.
how do we escape the overthinking trap?
Chambers suggests a few things: focusing on your values, staying present in the moment, and breaking down goals into smaller steps. By focusing on one step at a time, you don't get overwhelmed and can make steady progress.
Makes sense. He talks about this graphic designer who was unhappy in her job. She wanted to go freelance, but it felt too overwhelming.
Classic overthinking situation.
But by breaking down that goal into smaller chunks, she was able to move forward. She focused on improving her skills, then getting the equipment she needed, then finding clients, step by step.
Much more manageable.
It's a great example of how a big goal can feel less daunting when you break it down into smaller pieces. And, another key part of keeping that momentum going is prioritizing well-being,
Couldn't agree more. You can't pour from an empty cup.
right? Chambers says that well-being isn't a reward for achieving success, it's the foundation for maintaining it.
He talks about the interconnectedness of it all: physical health, mental health, emotional health, even social health.
It's not about making huge changes overnight, but about building sustainable habits.
And he stresses the importance of different types of rest. It's not just about sleep, it's about giving our minds and our senses a break.
He mentions physical rest, mental rest, sensory recharging, emotional refresh, even creative rest.
It's realizing that rest isn't optional. It's essential for our energy, our focus, our well-being. Which brings us to one of the big questions that Chambers explores in the book. What's the meaning of life?
The age-old question.
Right. But he reframes it in a more personal way. What's the meaning of your life?
I like that. It makes it more tangible, something you can actually explore.
And he emphasizes that it's not about finding some massive world-changing purpose. It's about figuring out what gives your life meaning and making sure your actions reflect that.
He shares his own journey of discovering his purpose, which shifted from seeking validation from others to focusing on making a positive impact on the world. And he brings in this Japanese concept called ikigai.
Ikigai, I've heard of that.
Tell me more about how he uses it in the book.
Well, it involves 4 elements: what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. Finding that sweet spot where those 4 things intersect, that's where you can discover your own unique path to a fulfilling life.
Finding that place where your passions, talents, and values align with the needs of the world. Powerful stuff.
And he stresses that purpose doesn't have to be about some grand mission. He gives the example of a woman who found her purpose in helping families find their dream homes. It wasn't about saving the world, but it was meaningful to her, and it made a difference in the lives of others.
It's about finding what lights you up and using your gifts to make a positive impact, no matter how big or small.
And that brings us back to defining success on your own terms. Chambers really challenges the idea that external validation is the only measure of success. He wants us to actively decide what success means to us based on our values and our own goals.
It's realizing that everyone's journey is different, and there's no one right way to define success.
He shares a really inspiring story about a woman named Sarah Paris who redefined her idea of success after losing her corporate job.
She had all the things people usually associate with success, the fancy title, the big salary,
Ugh.
but it wasn't fulfilling.
And she ended up finding more fulfillment by putting her family first and using her skills to help others, even though that meant stepping away from those traditional markers of success.
It's a good reminder that we get to choose what success means for us. It doesn't have to be what everyone else says it should be.
And this leads to something that Chambers talks about, which is the danger of comparison.
Oh, comparison can be so toxic. It's easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others and feeling like we're not good enough.
Chambers says that comparing ourselves to others can really sabotage our own sense of achievement. It can lead to a lot of unhappiness. He gives some tips for breaking that comparison habit and building a stronger sense of self-worth.
It's about celebrating our own wins, recognizing our progress, and remembering that everyone's journey is unique.
Exactly. And practicing gratitude is huge. Focusing on what we have instead of what we lack. It's easy to forget that social media often shows a very curated, filtered version of reality.
It's like we're comparing our behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel.
We have to remember that we're all human, we all struggle, and we're all just trying to do our best. Chambers also addresses the myth of this straight line path to success.
That idea that it's always a linear progression.
He says that embracing nonlinear success is a big part of finding true fulfillment.
He even suggests replacing the latter metaphor with a picture of a ship navigating through space.
Much more dynamic. I love that.
It emphasizes that our direction is relative to our own goals, not to what other people expect.
It means seeing those sideways moves, those detours, even the setbacks, as all part of the journey.
It's about letting go of the need for external validation and defining success on your own terms. And sometimes, those detours lead to amazing discoveries. He talks about Deborah Womack, a successful businesswoman who sort of accidentally found her passion for accessibility and inclusion.
She had this great career in business, but it wasn't until she became a board member for a group that advocates for people with disabilities that she really found her calling.
Sounds like a powerful turning point.
It was. She became passionate about advocating for those rights, and that led her to expand her work beyond the corporate world. It shows how following your passions, even when they lead you in unexpected directions, can bring a lot of meaning and fulfillment.
Sometimes those passions even lead to a complete reinvention, like Ollie Falayan, a successful engineer who co-founded AFBE UK, an organization dedicated to promoting diversity in engineering.
Taking his expertise in a technical field and using it to create positive social change.
So inspiring. It reminds us that we can use our skills and passions to make a difference in so many ways. And it brings us back to that feeling of being stuck, of running in place, getting nowhere.
Chambers' book really offers a way out of that cycle. It helps us find our own path to a more fulfilling life.
It's about embracing flexibility, learning from those failures, managing risk in a smart way, and working together.
Prioritizing well-being, defining success on our own terms, and most importantly, finding our purpose.
Making sure our actions reflect those values. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Momentum, 13 Ways to Unlock Your Potential by Lee Chambers. We hope you found it insightful.
Definitely thought-provoking.
What resonated most with you? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to check out the link to the book on Amazon. It's in the episode description.
And if you like this episode, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives like this.
We'll see you next time. Keep moving forward.